Good evening. Welcome to Dive into the IEP. My name is Sid Van Corsel. I'm coming to you from the WarmLine Family Resource Center office in Sacramento. I apologize for those of you who are getting in Lake County who are getting this by webinar. I had hoped to be there with you, but injured my back badly and am not able to do so. So this was our fallback position. So tonight we're going to talk about how to participate and collaborate to make the meeting successful. There's a little bit of basic information about the IEP. If you need more information, we have trainings coming up called Understanding Special Education, and we're also going to be making those into webinars too, so you can take a look at that. Oops, clicked the wrong thing. So WarmLine Family Resource Center is the parent training and information center that provides peer support and information to families of children with disabilities birth to 26 years old in 26 counties of Northern California. And you have up there our website and our phone number, and certainly you can ask questions during this evening. And Jenna, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, you muted yourself. Okay, that's cool. So you can type your questions in, and I can answer them for you as they come up. But obviously, there may be times when you have more in-depth questions that we won't be able to answer here. And so contacting us here at WarmLine is what we do. We are happy to review IEP documents for you. It's assessments and IEPs, and we're here to help you plan how to make a meeting successful. Our goal here is to support parents of children with disabilities, and what we do is we help parents learn their rights and brainstorm options to find appropriate resources. WarmLine staff are not attorneys, and we don't provide legal advice. We are, however, all parents of children with special needs, all ages, all diagnoses. We have our special ed staff is myself and a woman named Selena. And again, we're here anytime you need us to help you with those documents and help you plan for your meeting. So as a parent, I believe strongly that parents are their child's best and longest lasting advocates. And I know from experience that parents with good meeting skills can be even more effective. And we like to remind people that parents are the experts on their child. The professionals have the expertise. And ideally, when we put everybody together, we're able to benefit from what we both bring to the table, parents and professionals. So things we're going to explore a little bit this evening. I can move myself out of the way here a little bit. Are actually what's in the IEP, how to plan for the meeting, some tips from other parents, and a little tiny bit about self-advocacy for students. As you'll find out as we go along, the students are required to be invited to the IEP when they're 16. We hope that parents work with them at a much younger age so that they can participate in the IEP process in whatever works for them. What I did forget to tell you is there are some handouts in the right lower part of your screen that says handouts. And this PowerPoint is there, and there's also the little worksheet that we're going to talk about later on. I have all kinds of weird stuff covering my screens. Okay, well, what is special education? It's a federal law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's specifically designed instruction provided at no charge to parents, and it's written into an individual education plan, or IEP. And it includes something called related services, and we'll talk more about that, but that would be speech, OT, etc. And related services are defined by something that is there to assist the student to access special education services. So a little bit about related services. This is just a very, very short list of examples. If you go to the California Department of Education Special Education Division, they have a much longer list, and they state that even their long list is not exhaustive. There are additional related services that the child could receive. And so again, this is just an abbreviated list. I tried to look at the most common things that students may need. Speech language, orientation, mobility, that would be for a student who's blind. Adapted PE, physical therapy, occupational therapy, assistive technology, music therapy, transcription in Braille, and behavior services and transportation. In other words, this is any service necessary to help a student benefit from his or her special education program. But the student must be assessed in order to qualify for that service. And actually, transportation is the exception to that. We don't assess students. We talk to the parents and find out if the child needs transportation. So what the heck is an IEP? I see that Michelle's a professional. Jenna, can you raise your hand if you're a parent? Can you click on the hand raise? Or not? That's okay. Oh, good. Okay, great. Cool. Thank you for doing that. And you guys are the only two on tonight, so feel free to ask whatever question you want. We can talk about what I got for my birthday. We can talk about what I hope to get for Christmas, whatever you want. So what the heck is an IEP? It's a legally binding document that describes the school district's plan to provide educational and related services to a child with a disability. And the legally binding part is the key phrase in there. It provides a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. And I'm not a fan of acronyms, but FAPE is one that everyone should know. It can be amended without a new meeting. So if you and someone on the team feel that something needs to be changed, you can, there can be an amendment. You don't need every member of the team there, but I would encourage you, if you're going to make an amendment, that you have the relevant staff person there. I recently talked to a parent who had, they were going to have an amendment meeting to talk about classroom accommodations, but the classroom teacher wasn't going to be there. I don't feel completely comfortable about that. I think the person who's going to be putting that into effect should be attending the meeting. Parents can request an IEP at any time in writing, and the district has 30 days to convene the meeting. You're going to hear me say over and over and over again to put things in writing, and most of the time it's because there are timelines attached to that. So if you want to request an IEP meeting, if you just mention it to somebody, that usually, in my experience, does not begin that 30-day timeline. So it's important to put things in writing. And I recommend that if you are requesting an IEP meeting, you can certainly give it to the classroom teacher or the program manager. But I also would like to see it go to the district, the resource, or excuse me, program specialist. How do we get an IEP? We have to have assessments. An initial referral should be addressed to the Director of Special Education. Again, always in writing. Email's okay, but make sure it was received and note the date. On the next slide, you'll see the timelines that letter initiates. And we talk frequently with parents who say, well, I mentioned it to the classroom teacher, I mentioned it to the principal that I thought my child needed services, and yet nothing came of that. So because of that, just about every advocate I know of recommends that that referral should be to the Director of Special Education. And keep a copy of everything. So these are the timelines I was talking about. Up here we have in the upper left, we have that referral or the request for assessment that goes to the special ed department. They have 15 days to provide you with what's called an assessment plan. And an assessment plan tells what they're planning to do and who's going to do it. You have 15 days to get that back to the special ed department. When they've received it, they then have 60 days to do their assessments and convene the IEP meeting to discuss with you whether or not the child is eligible, and if so, write the IEP and get the services started. It should be implemented as soon as possible after being signed by the parents. You may take the IEP home to review it before signing it. You do not have to sign it while you're sitting at the table. And parents come to us frequently and say, well, I felt pressured by the school staff who were there. And my response is, they can make you feel pressured as much as you want, but you still have the right to take it home and read it before you sign it. But I do recommend that you let them know when you'll bring it back. So I'm going to take it home and reread it. I'll get it back to you in 48 hours or 72 hours, whatever it is. Let the person know that you will return it and when you'll be returning it. Because the school district cannot move forward with that IEP until it's been signed. And if the California Department of Education knocks on their door and says, let me see your records, they have to be able to account for all of their IEPs. The IEP is renewed annually, and every 3 years the special education eligibility is reviewed. I'm going to take a drink of juice. The medicine I took for my back is kind of helpful, but it also makes me dry out. So evaluations or assessments can help determine if the child is eligible for special education and what services or supports are needed. No one assessment tool can be used to assess eligibility. The child must be assessed in all areas of suspected disability. That's why we recommend that you be as specific as possible when you're making that request. My daughter is 4 years old and cannot speak in full sentences. My son is in 2nd grade and he's unable to read the 2nd grade at 2nd grade level. It's also helpful if the child has been diagnosed with something, say the pediatrician has diagnosed the child with ADHD, that you include that in the letter requesting assessment. And as a bonus, if you can have just a one-page summary of the doctor's report, that's even better. Again, the assessment plan tells what areas will be assessed. So speech and language would be assessed by the speech-language therapist. Psychoeducational assessments would be done by the school psychologist. If a parent disagrees with the assessment results, they can request an independent education evaluation at public expense, which means the school district will pay for it. But there's only one of these IEEs each time the school conducts an evaluation. So if you had a speech OT and psychoeducational assessments done, you would only be able to get an IEE for each one of those individual assessments. And if you do request an IEE, again, in writing to the Director of Special Education, the school district will give you a list to choose from of possible assessors. And in order to get it paid for by the school district, you do have to choose one of the people on their list. It's a long list. There are a lot of people on it. I'm going to talk a little bit about eligibility for special education. These are the federal eligibilities, but the disability must also impair the student's access to the curriculum. That's an important part of that. So, for example, the parent has gotten a diagnosis from Kaiser that the child has autism. So the parent takes that report and goes to the school district and says, I'd like to have my child assessed for special education services. Here's the report that says he has autism. Well, the child also needs to be found that his disability impairs his ability to access the curriculum. And sometimes that doesn't happen. You may have a child with autism who's working at grade level and doing fine. So we need to look at all of the things that child needs. Perhaps that child needs support with social skills and behavior support, but it's not going to necessarily be exactly what the parent was thinking it was going to be when they got the autism diagnosis. So medical diagnosis, educational diagnosis, or eligibility can be two separate things. We're going to go over the contents of the IEP, the most common pages that you're going to see. And the URL here is where you can find more in-depth explanation. It's the state SELPA IEP manual. We also have a link to this on the special education site, special education page on our website. So I'm going to start with Jenna's question. How do I know if I should request an IEP or 504 for my third grader who's been formally assessed and diagnosed with ADHD? Great question. I would probably start, I'm assuming that the child with ADHD has some behaviors in class and probably isn't doing well with schoolwork, and in which case I would request an IEP, because even if the child doesn't, I saw that, even if the child is, forgot my train of thought, even if the child doesn't qualify for special education, then we would look at a 504 for the child. But it's really useful to get those baseline assessments. And best practices with 504 is that they also do assessments when they're looking at writing a 504 plan for a parent. And again, I'm more than happy to go into depth with you, Jenna, about 504 plans. There's also a nice link to an FAQ on our special ed page. Does that help a little bit? Okay. You're welcome. Where were we? Okay. You guys are lucky. I'm also new to the webinars experience, and last night I had trouble because I couldn't see the questions people were typing. So I can see you now. I figured that out. Okay. So on the first page of the IEP, we have information and eligibility. It has all the students' demographics, address, parents' information. But it also has, about 2/3 of the way down, it will say why the child is eligible for special education. In California, they have two options, a primary and secondary. although they don't have to have a secondary. They can just have a primary. But that is where you're going to find the eligibility for the child. So, for example, a child with ADHD, for example, if that child qualifies, is probably going to be eligible under what's called other health impairment. So it's really useful to look at that eligibility and know specifically how the child is eligible. Present levels of performance, student strengths, preferences, and interests. Parents can be hugely helpful in this, letting the team know, especially when it's an initial IEP, letting the team know what the child, one of the ways the child learns best, for one thing. So you might say something like, well, my child is really into cooking, and we've been working on fractions at home and putting it, basing it on his interest in cooking. So that's a suggestion that the team might take. Parent concerns that are relevant to educational progress. And we're going to do more about that in a few slides, but this is important. And I've worked with parents for many years who say, well, I told them what my concerns were, but nothing ever came of it. And so our recommendation is that if you voice a concern that's educationally relevant, that I want to see something in that IEP that reflects that concern and some sort of strategy to address it. It's not a legal thing, that's best practice. More on the present levels, so you'll see all of these different categories. And for you, Jenna, so since you've never seen the IEP before, under each one of these categories, the person who assessed the child or the classroom teacher will be providing information. So, for example, what grade level is the child working at? Does the child, and hopefully they also break it up into skills. So reading skills with a report on that, spelling, functional skills, communication development, exactly what they sound like, gross and fine motor development. And so if there's been an occupational therapy assessment, there I would expect to see this filled out. Social emotional, a lot of our kids have issues with behavior, and I want to know what the present level is, and as the parent who knows the child, I want to make sure that that matches what I know about my child. Vocational, this is, some teachers will put in the child's ability to follow directions, complete tasks. Those are all vocational things, or it is acceptable for them to say that the child is too young for that. Adaptive daily living skills, so is the child able to toilet himself? Does he come to school dressed or shirt on backwards? And health. And the health part is usually filled out by the nurse who did the assessment, or usually typically talking to the parent. And I want parents to be sure to add anything that is relevant to education. So for example, maybe they don't know that this child has been diagnosed with ADHD. That's an important thing to add to that. Is the child on medication for it? We frequently work with parents who have children who have some kind of mental health diagnosis. In fact, I worked with a family fairly recently. He had ADHD, and that was well documented in the IEP, but they also had a report from the doctor that said he was also diagnosed with attachment disorder and anxiety. And in talking with the mother, I said it's really important that that be entered in there underneath health, because if it's not an issue now, it will become an issue as he gets older. And she also asked the team to just scan in that one-page report from the doctor, and they were happy to do that. So the documentation is important. After that list I showed you comes the areas of need, and I keep kicking myself because there are a couple typos in here and I keep forgetting to fix them. So under the area of need, so they might say speech, math, language arts, social skills, and there must be a goal or an appropriate accommodation for every area of need identified. There was a recent court case last winter, I think, where the court, and it was California, where the court said that there did not have to be a one-to-one correspondence between area of need and goal. But if something was, an area of need was identified, if there wasn't a goal, there needed to be an accommodation to work with it. And the example that they had in the case was a child with ADHD who had problems staying on task. So they had not written a task completion goal, but they did have very robust accommodations in there. And the court said that was cool. Parent input's important here. So you might say, you've sent me several notes about Carl not completing work. So it seems that you've identified that as an area of need that needs a goal. So how about we write a task completion goal? We're going to go through this pretty quickly since, Jenna, your child is only in 3rd grade. And so we have, beginning at age 16, we have an individual transition plan. It'll tell whether the student is going to get a diploma, which ends special ed services, or a certificate of completion, which continues special ed until age 22. The student must be invited to that meeting. He doesn't have to attend if he doesn't want to, but he must be invited. And we really hope that the student does attend. And then about on or before the 17th birthday, the student needs to be advised of his rights, that no matter how disabled this student is, when he or she turns 18, he has all of the rights of every other adult. They do a transition assessments that are based on education, employment, or independent living skills, if that's appropriate. And the post-secondary goals must be age appropriate and measurable. So I wouldn't want to see a post-secondary goal that Carl will do word searches, unless they can tie that to a transition goal, and I'm not really sure how that's physically possible. So it must, the goals must point toward education, employment, or independent living skills. Transition services, the course of study to assist reaching those goals, and related services that allow the student to access special education, just like the previous ones. And outside agencies that have been identified and invited. So for example, the Regional Center, the Department of Rehabilitation. They're not required to attend, but the school is required to invite them. And it's awfully nice when they do come. So annual goals, there must be, time out. There must be a baseline, and I have an illustration in the next slide of what the goal sheet, goal page looks like. So the baseline is the present level of performance, and it must be specific and quantifiable. It's not permissible to say, Carl doesn't pay it, Carl doesn't initiate work. That doesn't tell me anything. And so the goals must be specific, measurable, attainable. We don't expect Carl, who only does 4th grade math, to be able to do geometry. They must be time-bound, and they must be relevant. And they must be graded based on grade level standards. But the example I just used of Carl's only doing 2nd grade math, we need to understand that putting that grade level standard on there is not going to be attainable for him. Goals are major milestones, and short-term objectives are intermediate steps, moving the student toward the major milestone. And this is what most of the IEP, or excuse me, goal sheets look like in the program that is used in this area. So on the upper left, we have the area of need, task completion, baseline. Carl, by the way, Carl is one of my cats. Carl is completing his work without support 0% of the time. So that's quantifiable and specific. We have the IEP date, and then at the top right we have what do we expect Carl to be doing a year later. So March of 15, March of 16. And then we have Carl's intermediate goals. Feel free to stop me if you have questions. I don't. There we go. Offer of FAPE is the, again, we talked about that. That's free and appropriate public education. And so this page will tell you what the classroom placement is in the least restrictive environment. And we're going to talk about that on the next slide, what that looks like. Classroom placement outside general ed and related services. So for example, speech. It'll say who will provide it. So for example, it might say district of service. Where? Separate classroom. Individual or group is a checkbox. How often? How long? 30 minutes times 4, totaling 120 minutes per month. Beginning and end date. It's not uncommon for people who write IEPs to copy and paste information from one IEP to the next. So when I take my IEP home to read it, I'm going to be especially watchful for things like mistakes in dates. So where it says typically 1 year, I want to make sure that it's the current year. Individual or group, if I were the parent, I would want some clarification if both those boxes are checked. So he's getting speech individually and in the group. I want to know how much time he's going to spend in each one. How much time in the individual group, excuse me, individual, yeah, as an individual, and how much time in the group setting. Because we always want the IEP to be crystal clear so that anyone can come in from anywhere and read this and understand what the intent was of the people who wrote it. Transportation, yes or no. Extended school year. The criteria is if the child will have significant regression or recoupment period. All kids regress. All kids have a recoupment period when school starts again. But is this child going to have a significant amount of that? Okay, this is what the least restrictive environment looks like. It's called the Continuum of Placement, and every school district must have this continuum. It might look a little different from one school district to the next, but they must have it. So at the bottom we have instruction in the regular classroom, without supports, just all the kids there doing their thing. Next up, we have supplemental support in the general education classroom, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide, but that might be something like preferential seating, quiet place to do tests, maybe having the tests read to the student. Then we go up the pyramid to the resource specialist program, and this is a special ed teacher who has a separate or additional credential. Some schools call it the learning center, so it may go by different names, which is why it's useful for the parent to say, explain to me exactly what that placement looks like, because you're calling it learning library. Is that a resource specialist program? And next up the pyramid, and as you can see, as we go up the pyramid, it becomes more and more restrictive an environment. I like to turn that around and reframe that and say we're talking about a student who needs more and more support for his education. I know least restrictive environment is the legal term, but I like to think of the student needing more support. So next up is special day class, also called self-contained classroom. And it's theoretically possible that a student could go back and forth. So he might do his core assignments in a special day class and then go back to the general education classroom. He could theoretically spend maybe as much as half his day with the resource specialist and go back for part of the day to the general education classroom. So those are totally doable and something I encourage parents to talk with the team about. Next up, we have state special schools. That in Northern California, that would be the School for the Deaf and for the Blind that are both located in Fremont. Non-public schools are private schools that cater to children with disabilities. And a district would place a child in a non-public school only if they do not have the resources to educate him within their district. Instruction in home and hospital is exactly how it sounds. And then at the top is residential placement for a child that has mental health issues. And it's very, very complicated as they decide where that residential placement happens and who provides it. So it's a complicated process. So I said we were going to talk about supplemental aids and services and also accommodations and modifications. So we already talked about some of these: shortened reading assignment, test read aloud, dictating answers. I love this one. For a child who maybe have ADHD, maybe has a learning disability, they're so wiped out by the end of the day that it's like pulling teeth to get them to do homework. But what if we allowed that child to dictate the answers to a parent who gets to write, who writes it down for him? That's a very valid accommodation that is used in a lot of different settings. When my son was little, we did that. We also have a whiteboard in the kitchen, and so we used to race to see who could do the math problem the quickest, and then I actually would take a picture and send it to the teacher. She could see that he had done the work. Extra time on tests, quiet place to do assignments, audiobooks for a child with a learning disability. Let's get him an audiobook. Let's let him record lectures. Using the computer for written work, so keyboarding if handwriting's an issue. Use of a calculator if that's appropriate. It depends on the age and depends on the child. Planning time for staff collaboration. I like this one a lot, especially for a child who has complicated needs, maybe has a behavior intervention plan. I really want to see that someone from special education is supporting that classroom teacher as she tries to follow the behavior intervention plan. So think of accommodations as ways to lighten the workload, and modifications actually change what's being taught or the curriculum. And it's important to get those two words defined. Educators sometimes will use them interchangeably, and they are not interchangeable. And so where the modification is a concern is if a child is going to be expected to get a diploma, we don't want to modify his curriculum because that may put his diploma at risk. So anytime an educator mentions either one, I always ask, can you tell me exactly what that looks like? Can't write fast enough. Yes, Jenna, the slides are in your handouts. If you go the lower right-hand side where it says handouts, 2 of 5, I think if I open it, you can see it. Anyway, it's there, and if you have problems, if you have problems downloading it from there, I'm happy to send them to you because I have your email address and I can do that. So don't break your hand. Offer of FAPE educational settings. It will tell what percentage of the day the child will be inside and outside the general education classroom. I pay close attention to this because I want to make sure that that makes sense when I look back at that offer of FAPE page, that the math has been done right, that the time that he or she is out of the general education classroom is equal to what it says in the offer of FAPE. How and when parent will be informed of students' progress. The law says that students with IEPs must be given, parents must be given progress reports at least as often as general education students receive them. My issue is that sometimes parents don't know that's what they've received. So I talk with parents about, you know that this is the IEP says you're supposed to get an update X amount of times a year. So talk with the teacher when you're in parent-teacher conference. Is what you're telling me also include a report on progress on goals? And if the answer is no, then I would let the person who, the program student manager, the person on the campus who's managing the student's program, know that you haven't been receiving progress reports, because that's causes them to be out of compliance with the IEP. And speech and occupational therapy, those related services, must also provide that. So graduation plan, projected date, whether or not the student will graduate, or certificate of completion. Special factors. Does the student require assistive technology? And remember that assistive technology can mean high-tech, like a laptop. It can also mean low-tech, like a pencil grip. Occupational therapists are amazing people who come up with astounding low-tech ways to help students access the curriculum. So that might be reason if a student is struggling with how to hold a pencil, how to, actually get the work done, it might be useful to have an occupational therapy consultation and just get some input there. Does the student require low incidence services? Low incidence is deaf, blind, or orthopedically impaired. So if your child was one of those, you'd know that by now. considerations for students blind or visually impaired or deaf or hard of hearing. And the big one, drum roll, does the student's behavior impede learning of self or others? It's a yes and no box. If the no box is checked, and I've been getting notes home from school once a week about behaviors, or if the student's been suspended, I'm going to bring that to the attention of the team. So you've checked no. However, in my binder here, where I keep all of my records, I have multiple notes from you that he does have behaviors. So we need to address that. So if the yes box is checked, they're required to specify positive behavior interventions and strategies. It's required. You can look it up. Is there a behavior goal part of the IEP? That's not required, but it's best practice. If you've identified a behavior issue as an area of need, you need to have a goal with it. And is there a behavior intervention plan attached? Not every child who has behaviors has a behavior intervention plan, but many of those children should have one. And so that might be, if one hasn't been done and there's a repeated issue with behaviors, it might be a useful thing to request that a behavior intervention plan be done along with a functional behavior analysis, which tells you why we think the student's having behaviors, and then will help provide alternatives to the behavior. Come on, there we go. Meeting notes. I like meeting notes a lot. I like to see a lot of stuff in them. I have seen IEPs that say just the very basics that they have to, by law, that the parent was offered, you know, his rights, and this is a rich part that can be made a really useful part of the IEP, that you can put things there that don't really fit elsewhere. So we expect to see what was discussed in decisions made, parent participation, and it behooves the school district to show and prove that there was parent participation. Without that, they are leaving themselves open to a due process complaint. Document that several options were discussed and considered. I like to see here, if we talked about, say, a behavior strategy and discussed it, decided to move forward with it, decided not to move forward with it, I'd like to see that in those notes. I want to see that everything that we actually discussed, and ensure a clear and appropriate offer of FAPE was made and clarification of items. I talked with someone a couple of days ago who the child in the notes section, or earlier there was somewhere they had put that he would benefit from a sensory diet, but it wasn't in the FAPE, and it really wasn't in the notes either. So that means that the conversation never happened. So she's going to go back and review with the team exactly what the plan is around that sensory diet. Parent signature. You can agree to all or just parts of the IEP, and if there's a disagreement, do include a short explanation. So for example, I disagree with the recommendation to decrease speech therapy from 30 minutes a week to 30 minutes a month. If you do that, so I'm agreeing with everything but that issue with speech, that 30 minutes a week stays put until you resolve the disagreement. Again, you do not have to sign it immediately after the meeting. There's nowhere in the law that says that. You can take the IEP home to review. Do find out who's the person I contact if I have questions, and who should I return it to. It may not be the same people. Oh my stars, the phone's ringing. These are some things to double check before signing. And if you haven't visited understood.org, it's a wonderful website. It has parenting tips, it has special education information, great stuff for kids about how to resolve social skills issues and stuff. So it's a really good resource. So are the statements in the present levels based on data, hard data from you and your child's teacher? Or did somebody just say, well, you know, Carl's doing well in math? Does the IEP state how and when the school will report the progress? Remember, there's a spot on there for them to put that in. And I actually, if I were in the room, I would say, now we're all on the same page that this needs to be reported X number of times. Miss Speech Therapist, how's that going to look? How are you going to report that to me? Mr. OT, same question. How's that going to look? How are you going to provide me with the progress on goals? And if you requested any changes to the IEP, are they in the final document? And does it have everything you did agree to, including the accommodations, services, and goals? And one of the things we're going to talk about later is how useful it is for you to bring somebody with you to take notes. And so that you don't get confused about what was discussed, and it's a great way to make sure that all of the issues that you wanted to address are in there. Are the annual goals clearly stated? Do you understand them? Parents call us and say, I know he has goals, but I have no idea what this means. And actually our response usually is, go ask the person who wrote it, because I don't know what the person intended when they wrote that. Is there anything in the IEP you did not discuss or agree to? And sometimes what happens, Jenna, is that everybody at the table gets so excited, and one person is typing, and so everyone gets so excited and starts saying, hey, I know what we'll do, hey, I know what we'll do, and information gets lost and not recorded. So one of the things that I recommend your note taker does is say, hang on just a second, you all have great ideas. I think the person who's typing may have missed some of that, so let's back up a little bit. Preparing for the IEP. Michelle, does this look familiar to you? Because the professionals feel this way sometimes too. This is the part where I tell you my husband's a special ed teacher, so I've seen this look on him and me. So one of the things where I like to start with when talking about IEPs is reframing it, because parents hate them, administrators hate them, teachers hate them, everybody hates them. Let's turn that around and let's think of it as an opportunity. You get to meet the members of the team that you may not know already, or you get to see people you haven't seen in a year, because speech therapy you may email, but you don't see her throughout the year. And you provide input into the design of the program tailored to your child's individual needs. You actually are the first person on the list of who should be in an IEP meeting, is the parent. Share the special perceptions and knowledge you have about your child. Work creatively with your child's teachers and providers. And what we're going to talk about in a couple of slides is actually a worksheet that we created to help move you forward on that. So what we're going to do, and this again, I've uploaded it for your handouts. I forgot to upload it to our website today, but I have it on my list of things to do tomorrow. And so this is a worksheet that we recently came up with to help parents identify and prioritize their concerns. Because sometimes it's hard to put what your concerns in order so that you have them in a nice way to deliver them to the team. So these are the things we saw when we looked at present levels of performance, and they're repeated here, and on the worksheet, the handout, it's all on one page. They're repeated here as something to kind of give you an idea about where do I have concerns. I may not have concerns, but where do I have concerns? I'm a new school nurse and I'm getting lots of practice. My daughter's parent regarding, yes, I did work at Sutter. I was in respiratory. I probably know you. Cool. That's neat. I retired about 4 years ago. So this is what the meat of that worksheet looks like. So I decided that the area of need I had concerns about was Carl's social, emotional, and behavior issues. Only you can't see me. I know. So first off, what are my concerns about my child's educational program? I have concerns that he has aggressive behavior with peers at recess, because I keep getting notes about it. Why is that important to the education? And it sounds like, oh, please don't make me do all this work. But I promise you a batch of chocolate chip cookies that this will help bring your thoughts together in an organized manner. So it's important because he doesn't have friends, and he's had repeated suspension which caused him to miss instruction. So that's a biggie. So why does the IEP team need to know? And we're going to pretend that Carl has had a speech assessment. That's why I know he has difficulty with pragmatic or conversational speech, and he just can't express his frustration to peers. He can't say, I'm upset because you're hogging the ball, and it's my turn now. And so the behavior he exhibits is whacking the kid upside the head. What strategies do I recommend? Pragmatic speech goals. Remember, he's already had that speech assessment. Taking turns goals. And the team may need to kind of do some thinking about what would that look like. And a behavior intervention plan to provide alternative behaviors when Carl gets frustrated. There's nothing that says the team must use these strategies or solutions, but I think almost 100% of the time that I or anyone else I know has presented things like this to the team, they're so happy to have that input. And it also helps you, again, it helps you to focus your concerns. It kind of helps you to put that mommy hat to the side for just a few minutes so that you can look at this rationally. And be open to compromise or trial period. When my son was in first grade, he's almost 28, sensory processing issues were very new. Nobody knew anything about it. And the school district said, well, we can't provide him with occupational therapy. There's no data that says that will work. So I said, well, how about we try it for 8 weeks? We'll write sensory goals. We'll try it for 8 weeks. Then we'll come back together and talk about, was this effective? If it's not effective, I'm the first one to say, let's get rid of it. But if it was effective, that provides us with the data that we needed to say, yes, we should be doing this. And at the bottom it says less practice, because if we were all in the same room together, you would have the opportunity to fill this out and we'd talk about it. I can't figure out how to do that with webinar. I will down the road probably. So this is an example of a parent report. It's also called a one-page report or person-centered plan. And in the upper right-hand corner is Carl. He's in a suitcase getting ready to go somewhere. So in this report, Carl Vespoli is 8. So I've listed my vision for his future, that he'll live away from home with support, have friends, a social life, and paid employment. Even though he's only 8, I'm looking ahead to what his life will be. His strengths, he has a big heart and he's funny. His challenges, difficulty with transitions and executive functioning. He likes playing games, things he doesn't like. And this is really useful because he's never been in this class before. So for me to tell the teacher, this is what he likes, this is what he doesn't like, is really helpful to her. What to watch for. If he's nervous or frustrated, he taps his tail, which means we're going to have a behavior outburst any minute, so let's do something to distract him. So here's how you help him. Give him a break. Explain what's going to happen next when he gets frustrated. And at the very bottom, there's a website to one of our sister agencies in Oregon, and they have a page that has tons of these examples on it. And this is just another example. In this case, he's 16. Here are my visions for him. Here are my concerns. Completing tasks, social interactions, behaviors, lack of soft employment skills. And here are the goals that I think we should be working on. It's entirely possible that the team has already identified these goals, but I want to make sure that these things are being addressed. And I started using the parent report when my son was about 12, and had one every year and attached it, it was just automatically scanned into the IEP and became part of the record. Hi, Carl. Really recommend keeping a binder of information. Another thing parents tell us frequently is, I don't know where the IEP is, I don't know where those assessments are, I don't know who sent me that note because I can't find it. The reason I personally like a binder rather than a folder is that I'm kind of have problems with papers, and if I punch a hole in it and file it in the binder, then I can't take it out and misfile it. And so in it you would keep communication logs, assessments and evaluations, IEPs, progress reports, and educationally related medical information. So Michelle, you're going to like this. So anytime you see a new medical provider, ask to be sent a copy of the initial exam. The person who's doing that exam or assessment will automatically send a copy to your pediatrician, and it's no big deal to say, hey, would you also put me on that list to get a copy? That way when you have it in your binder. Someone at the school district needs it, all you have to do is give it to them to copy. If you don't have it, then as you both know, you have to sign 100 release form, and it has to go here and here and here and here and here. And it's just so much easier and so much stressful for you if you already have it. We actually have trainings called Let's Get Organized, and we have one in Galt in a couple of weeks. It's on our website. So we provide binders and dividers and hole punchers and shredders, and people just bring their records and put them in order. It's kind of like a scrapbooking party. Know what's on the IEP, so review it. And we actually recommend don't put it away or make a copy and keep one, put it on the refrigerator, put it on the bulletin board, someplace where you're going to remember to say, I haven't talked to the speech therapist in about a month. I should probably check in with her and see if what's happening with his speech goals. So know why your child is eligible for special education, know what services are currently being provided, what are the current goals, and monitor the IEP. Know what he's working on and if progress is being made. People call us, I promise you, 2 days before their IEP and say he didn't learn anything. He never made progress on his goals. So I really putting it on parents to monitor that. I don't. The teacher has 30 students. The program in Sac City Unified, the program specialists have about 600 on their caseload, but I only have one student on my caseload. So I really take it upon myself to be up on those things. You can ask for copies. You can ask for copies of new assignments prior to the meeting. And I actually remind people several times, I would like a copy of that before the meeting, I would like a copy of that, because they frequently don't, we don't do our homework sometimes until it's due. And some of the people who are doing assessments are the same. They may not have written up their report until the day before it's due. So I always ask them, can you get that done a few days early so I can have a copy of it? Read the assessment, write down your questions and comments. I like to start with reading assessments at the end, where it has the summary and recommendations from the person who did the assessments, and then I go back to the beginning and read them. Yeah, I agree, Michelle, that is, getting parents to provide the information is tough. Yeah, I get that. My husband works in a school it's a Title I school, and a lot of times parents don't even come to the IEPs. They have to stalk them and sit outside their houses in order to get them signed. Yeah, you guys have a tough job. So support, and we already mentioned, you don't have to go to the meeting alone. Take someone to take notes for you, provide moral support, discuss how the meeting went. We all do that here prior to a meeting. My son's not in school anymore, but he has quarterly meetings and 5 agencies that support him. So I try to make sure that before a meeting I sit down with one of the people here in the office and say, here's my agenda. Here's what I want to discuss with the team. And I just talk it through so that by the time I get to the meeting, I have it firmly in my mind that this is what I want to discuss. Persistence is mad. No, I don't work for Twin Rivers. So you can invite anybody you want to the meeting. My recommendation is if you're bringing more than one person, let them know so there are enough chairs. I did this one time. I brought 3 people. 2 of them were from the recreation program to give input about my son's behavior. And I forgot to call ahead, and it was tough. We didn't have quite enough seating for everybody in the room, so just give them a heads up. At the meeting, we're getting to be almost finished. So this is straight out of the law, and so when we look at people attending the meetings, the parent is not legally required. We can't force a parent to attend, but the law recognizes that the parent is the most important person on this team. And so they must, and here's another typo, one gen ed teacher, if the child receives general education services or is expected to, then there would have to be a general education teacher present. Hopefully I'll remember tomorrow to fix that sentence. at least one special education teacher or special education provider. So if the child was only receiving speech therapy, that would be the provider who was there. School district representative, this is important, knowledgeable about general and special education curriculum and resources. So this could be any number of people. It might be the program specialist, it might be the resource specialist. It just kind of depends on what's going on at the meeting. Any specialists who can interpret evaluations and instructional implications. So this could also be the special education teacher. Again, the child has to be invited at age 16, but earlier participation does wonders to build self-advocacy skills. And again, anyone the parent would like to invite. Oh, we have someone joining us. Hello, Stella. I really like to get to the meeting a little early so I can decide where to sit that I feel the most effective. Sometimes I sit at the head of the table. I think we all have places where we physically feel more comfortable at a meeting, and so that's the idea behind that. If you don't bring your child to the meeting, you can bring a photograph of him or her to place on the table, and that's a nice strategy because some of the people may have just done assessments and don't know your child, and this kind of, it lends a face to the person that they've been writing assessments about. And it's a nice focus for the group. We are not kidding, recommend people take food to share. It always, 100% of the time, lightens the mood and makes people feel valued. I don't bake, so I always had to go out and buy something. One of our staff people recently had an IEP that was at lunchtime, so she took pizza. People were so happy. And they said, oh wow, if we had known that, we'd have planned a potluck. So at the beginning of the meeting, and I think this is such a wise recommendation, this is from another parent, find out how much time is allotted for the meeting. The meetings are typically scheduled back to back to back to back, and so when I sit down, I'm going to say, how much time do we have? Okay, we have an hour and a half. Okay, I just want to let you guys know we're not going to rush through this, and if we aren't finished at the end of the time, I expect everybody we'll schedule the follow-up meeting before we leave here. I don't want to be rushed on this, and sometimes people don't plan the time well, and so they spend a lot of time talking for the first hour and then have to rush through the last half hour, and that's not useful. Ask to set aside 15 to 20 minutes before the end of the meeting to review the notes that were written and decisions that were made. I think this is a really, really wise tip. And feel free to share what works for you. So you said Gwen's resistant to doing her math. Here's what we do at home. And that even might be something that you would put on your concern worksheet, that Gwen is resistant to beginning her math assignment. Child's behaviors may demonstrate a need for something. So the teacher will say, Dave acts out in class daily, and because this parent swallowed a thesaurus, she would say, let's write a request for a functional behavior analysis to pinpoint why the behaviors are occurring. It's not okay for somebody to just hassle you all the time that your kid is doing something wrong. Well, then let's figure out how to fix it. Mike is always losing his homework. It sounds as though you would benefit from having a goal around organizational skills. Probably 100% of the kids who have, close to 100%, who have an IEP struggle with organizational skills. So it shouldn't be a big shock that we have to write goals around that. And at the end of the meeting, summarize who's going to do what by when, and ask that to be included in the notes. Because sometimes the people on the team will say, well, I'll take care of this, or I'll follow up on that, and then it never happens. So having it in the notes gives people the impetus they need, since the IEP is legally binding, that they'll do what they said they would do. And parents ask us all the time, they say, you know, I didn't know what questions to ask. The team asked me at the end of the meeting, did I have any questions? And so I came up with this a few years ago just to help trigger your thought process. So what's being recommended? Why is it being recommended? I love the word why. It's just, it's a marvelous word. What's the goal? And I also love the phrase, what will that look like? What's that going to look like if you do that? And sometimes the people on the team will wind up saying, I'm not sure that's actually possible now that I think about it. Who'll provide it, when, where, and how's the progress going to be monitored? And when we talked a little bit ago about, you know, something a parent would ask us and we say, you're going to have to ask the person who wrote that. I can't guess what they meant when they wrote that or they said that. And so it's okay when someone says something to say, why? Why do you say that? Tell me more about that. And it's perfectly acceptable too, if you don't think of those why questions at the table, that you can follow up with them after the meeting before you sign the IEP. Phrases again from understood.org. How can we work together to make this happen? And putting it into the context that we are a team. I love, may I see a written copy of that policy, written policy, because parents will come to us and say, they told me that the district doesn't do X. And we say, where's that written? We need proof of that. And if someone says, you know, Mr. Smith is the only one to has the authority to make a decision, we say, well, let's ask him to join us. Or we table the meeting until he can join us. I understand is a very useful phrase to use when you're working with people. Lets them know that I'm part of it and I'm listening to what you're saying. I understand. We only have 15 minutes left. And I've noticed, kind of goes along with I understand, and you can read that. Number 6 is, how will that look in the classroom? So, you know, somebody decided that every 15 minutes someone's going to check off on the behavior plan whether or not Olivia is on task. How's that going to look in the classroom? It sounds easy while we're sitting here at the table, but how's the teacher going to follow up with that? What alternatives do you suggest to address that identified need? And this is the magic of bringing everybody together in the IEP, because you can talk about, you can get all those brains to think about, yeah, let's talk about how we can address that. And let's talk about what is working. I'm sick and tired of talking about what isn't working for my kid. Let's spend some time talking about what is working. Last section, ladies. We're going to talk just a tiny bit about self-advocacy and student-led IEPs. And actually, I prefer the term student participation. I think it's more descriptive of what it looks like. So there have been studies done on student participation in IEPs and the advantages. And for kids the opportunity to develop self-advocacy and leadership skills, better understanding and awareness of supports needed to succeed. They're more involved and engaged and self-determined overall. For parents, improved communication and interaction with school staff. And for teachers, positive relationships with students and parents. And the IEP meeting is more centered on the student's need, with everyone's satisfaction being improved. There's also the same study talks about administrators too, that they have high praise for student-led IEPs. So here are some of the things where we start with self-advocacy with a child. Knowing what your disability is. My son has autism and cerebral palsy. So explaining that to him as early an age as possible in age-appropriate terms. Talking about what you're good at, what you need help with, what you like and don't like, what's important to you, and I think the most important one is who are the people you can depend on. And students can participate in many ways. They don't have to come in the beginning of the meeting and sit there through the whole thing. So they can attend part or all of the meeting if it's appropriate. Introduce the team members, provide input, so that they might either, and the last one, preparing the information about themselves. So it might be they draw stuff. It might be you video record them talking about their accomplishments and concerns. Work samples. A lot of high school students and many districts actually have a class, not a whole class, but a section where kids go through this, the self-advocacy and the student-led IEP. And a lot of them wind up creating PowerPoints that they actually show themselves in the classroom. And we have a training called Student-Led IEPs doing just that. So how do I help the student prepare for the IEP? Okay, he needs to know he has an IEP and why and the purpose. And so I would bring that back around to the autism and cerebral palsy disabilities and how the IEP helps him to access the curriculum. And reviewing the last IEP together, talk about what he or she likes about school, what's working, what's not, how does the current IEP help? And if something's not working, work with the student to strategize solutions and write them down. We've talked a lot tonight about the strategy worksheet, and this is kind of the same sort of thing, and writing them down. And if the student chooses not to talk about it, you can provide the ideas and let the team know we came up with this together. We encourage parents of older kids, when we send them a menu of accommodations, that if the child is old enough to participate in the conversation, ask him what he thinks of these accommodations, what he thinks will work, what might not work. And then talk with the student about participating in the IEP and how he wants to do that. And, you know, if they're not ready, they're not ready. But we want them to understand that this is about them and their input is important. So we've come to the end of our little adventure. Any other questions from you ladies? Jenna, were you able to open that handout with the PowerPoint in it? Okay, I can email it to you tomorrow. I'm happy to email it to you. So, and I can email both those documents to both of you guys if you like. So has nope, do you do Facebook? Yes. Yeah. Tech challenge, that's okay, that's okay. So here's our phone number and our website. And remember, nobody was born knowing how to do this stuff. It's practice, practice, practice. And we also remember that people love snacks. And so when you feed people, it makes them very, very happy. And alone we can do so little, and together we can do so much. I just love this picture. So thank you for joining us. Because of illness in Lake County, we had a smaller group than we anticipated, but I'm so glad you ladies were here. Oh, thank you. And I will send those documents, and call me anytime. Good night, ladies.